Doom: The Dark Ages was already one of the most technically impressive games you could play on a PC, and just last week it got upgraded with NVIDIA path tracing and support for NVIDIA DLSS 4. Enjoy those new features and more thanks to Gigabyte's industry-leading range of GeForce RTX 50 series GPUs. Click below to check them out right now or stick around to the end of the video to learn more. Gamers. Okay, so obviously some stuff happened this week, some very, very big stuff in fact. The truth is it's so big that I need a little more time to properly process it and to write up what I want to write up. And the total word count on that would probably be so large that it would likely see this episode balloon out to like 2 hours long. So similar to the last time that Xbox sacked a bunch of people and closed a bunch of studios, I'm going to do a separate video on that very soon. And we're also going to be discussing it at length during this week's episode of the Friends Per Second podcast. We're also going to be joined by Jordan Midler of Video Game Chronicle. A lot to cover and we will cover it, but I want to make sure I do it properly. In the meantime, other things happened this week, so let's talk about those, shall we? Bit of a rough start for Remedy's FBC Firebreak. In fact, a very rough start. You might have missed this one since it really hasn't garnered much chatter, but Remedy, makers of Max Payne, Quantum Break, Control, and Alan Wake, released a co-op shooter a few weeks ago. It's based on their Control IP, and while it's set in the oldest house, it doesn't star Jesse Faden. It stars a bunch of maintenance workers who gear up to push back waves of hiss enemies while accomplishing various objectives. If you've played stuff like Left 4 Dead or Back 4 Blood, then you very much know the drill. Remedy has been riding rather high after releasing both Control and Alan Wake 2, two games that really showed what it was like when Remedy leaned into their own brand of weirdness. They also did that campaign for Crossfire for Xbox, but that was so bad that it feels like the entire video game playing population did the classic Men in Black neuralizer to themselves, preferring to pretend that it never existed and instead just focusing on Remedy's other output. Remedy has not been at all shy about some of the financial and publishing struggles they've had. It was only recently that Alan Wake 2 turned a profit, and without Epic underwriting the development of that game, it never would have happened. Control is another one that took time to achieve payback, and it ended up being so successful that Remedy actually bought the rights to the IP back from 505 Games, who themselves have been having a bit of a rough run lately. Anyway, all this is to say that Remedy has been pushing through some resistance when it comes to getting their games to market, and FBC Firebreak is in keeping with that recent trend. Despite the fact that the game hit over 1 million total players thanks to Game Pass, the number of people on other platforms seems to be almost non-existent. On Steam, the game peaked at just 1,192 people, and more recently, player counts put the game at just 100 to 200 peak concurrent players. That's the sort of territory that can make it hard for people to matchmake into games, a crucial ingredient in the long-term success of a game like this. With these numbers as background, Remedy comms lead Thomas Pua sat down for an interview with GameSpot where he was very candid about the current state of things. Quote, "We aren't naive. We had hoped for a better launch, but the team here is super motivated to continue building the game and responding to player feedback. We already reacted during launch week with patch 1.2, making some big changes to the game. As Remedy does, we'll do things with smaller teams in our way and try to solve challenges creatively," end quote. He's referring to some of the balance and progression feedback that the game has been getting from both players and critics. That feedback has resulted in a fairly middling critical reception to the game, with it sitting at a mixed 67% on Steam and a weak 64% on OpenCritic. Pua was equally candid about the critical reception. Quote, "We didn't do a great job at all with onboarding and what we call the first hour's progression. So players' frustration at the beginning of the game is understandable when there are a lot of systems thrown at you with little explanation, and the tier 1 weapons weren't hitting that hard amongst other things. We feel strongly that what we have in the pipeline is going to be exciting for players. There is some game-changing content in development," end quote. Important to note that Remedy have also designed Firebreak as a deliberate response to the whole live service FOMO-driven model that most online-enabled games are designed around. Quote, "We never designed the game to be something that requires daily logins for some random stuff, making the game your other job. Instead, you play Firebreak for a while, take a break, and come back when we release new content in the form of major updates," end quote. Either way, it is encouraging that Remedy are sticking with this one. Sure, ideally it's a banger right out of the gate, or perhaps it should have launched into early access to better telegraph the fact that it still had a ways to go, but at the end of the day, it's a small team on this, and Remedy are self-publishing it, and they're trying to make a multiplayer game that respects your time and isn't looking to endlessly fleece you. That's a vision that I can get behind, so I wish the team well on this post-launch journey. Here's something I definitely can't and won't ever get behind. Riot is allowing betting sponsors for Valorant and League of Legends esports teams. Hooray, just what the world needs. Gambling endorsements squarely targeted at males aged 16 to 25. Great job, Riot. Here's a story. Riot put up a blog post this week titled, "Why We Are Opening Betting Sponsorships in Esports and How We're Doing It Responsibly." Let me help you with this one, Riot. There is no way to do this responsibly. The only responsible way to do it is to not do it, meaning that, in fact, you have been responsibly handling it to this point, and when you put up this blog post, you stopped handling it responsibly. Quote, "We know sports betting isn't for everyone." Yeah, no shit. "And some fans have strong feelings about it." Yeah, no shit. And we respect that. Do you though? However, the reality is that betting activity already exists around our sports and will continue whether we engage with it or not. Historically, this has been a restricted sponsorship category, and Riot has not engaged with betting companies. Teams have asked us to reconsider our stance, and after years of analysis to ensure we got it right, we agreed it was time to open up this category to create more revenue opportunities for teams, end quote. That is ultimately the justification that many gambling-funded institutions use when they try to explain away their funding model. For example, here in Australia, most of our community clubs are funded by slot machines, aka pokies, and the clubs are all like, we invest all the money in the local juniors teams and community outreach or whatever. But it's still just marketing to obscure the fact that most clubs these days are proxy casinos sucking the life savings out of elderly pensioners. Sure enough, Riot trotted out that line here, quote, "A portion of Riot's revenue earned from the sports betting program will be invested back into Tier 2 across a number of areas, including increasing prize pools and creating new tournaments to support aspiring pros, additional integrity systems development, and expanded training and education programs for our partner tournament operators and aspiring pros," end quote. So that's good. The next generation of Riot esports talent will be funded by gambling, working for teams, sponsored by gambling companies, no doubt encouraging their young fans to gamble because that is where the money is. Riot have committed to a number of what they call guardrails. These include the vetting of all betting sponsors and the requirement that teams develop an internal integrity program, as if taking on a betting sponsor wasn't a breach in and of itself. They also say they'll be protecting the viewing experience. Quote, "The last thing we want to do is disrupt LOL esports and VCT broadcasts with an influx of sports betting ads. So we've established at the onset that Riot-owned broadcasts and social channels will stay betting free, which means no ads, no sponsored segments from betting partners, and no betting partners' logos on team jerseys," end quote. Let's see how long those restrictions last. If they are still in place 18 months from now, I'm going to be very, very surprised. The Riot community are pretty against this for obvious reasons. One quick scan of the associated Reddit post tells you everything you need to know. User Ashen Kura said, quote, "Can't wait for the lost all your savings Baron steal," end quote. Zealot416 wrote, quote, "Also, toxicity skyrockets because moron A hears streamer B say how good Team C is and then decides to bet the house on them. Team C then loses, and then both the players and the streamer get spammed with death threats," end quote. And that's really true, actually. A recent report in The Atlantic revealed that in MLB, 78% of players said that betting had changed how fans treated them, with some of them reporting death threats received after a poor showing on the field. When you invite this stuff in, its corrosive impact is felt by everyone. Players, people who bet, and people who don't. Anyway, that's this seal broken. Gambling is coming to a Riot esport near you, and given the size of Riot and its overall footprint on the esports scene, I shudder to imagine what sort of flow-on impacts this decision will have on other esports. Changing tack now, and we're doing a lot of Xbox news in a separate video, but for now, let's knock over some Sony news. Friend of the channel, Stephen Datillo of GameFile recently sat down with Sony's VP of Services, Nick McGuire, and the main topic of conversation was PS Plus. TLDR, it's going really well, and Sony don't have any plans to change things up anytime soon. On the topic of whether or not Sony would look to match Xbox's day one launch into Game Pass for new release games, Sony was like, no thanks. Quote, "We've sort of stayed true to our strategy across the board, and we're not looking to put our games in day and date. Our strategy of finding 4 or 5 independent day and date titles and using that to complement our strategy of bringing games in when they're 12, 18 months or older, that balance for us is working really well across the platform," end quote. And you know what? I actually really like Sony's approach. Don't get me wrong. Game Pass is extraordinary value. There's no doubt about that. It makes it incredibly easy to not only get hold of new release blockbusters, but it also makes it easy to jump into AA or indie games that you might otherwise be hesitant to pay full price for. All of that is true. But I also just kind of feel it in my jellies that putting Indiana Jones and Doom the Dark Ages on their day one, that sort of devalues those games, or at the very least, the way we think about the value of games and our ownership of them. It definitely warps buying habits, as Xbox developers we've personally spoken to have said that there's almost no point in porting your game to Xbox unless you plan to make it available on Game Pass, since that audience is now just so conditioned to getting everything through that service. I don't think Netflix has been a net positive for the cinematic art form, and I harbor similar reservations about Game Pass despite its undeniable short-term benefits. In this way, I think Sony's compass is pretty on point here. Maguire also revealed that Ghost of Tsushima is one of the most played PS Plus games every month on the service, consistently in the top 3, and that other first-party Sony titles consistently rank in the top 10, despite all of the games listed selling a healthy number of box copies before moving on to the subscription service. In terms of overall engagement, Maguire revealed that, quote, engagement with PS Plus has never been higher than it is right now, end quote, and that the new pricing tiers for PS Plus exceeded their expectations. He said that more users sign up to the top tier than the middle tier, and all that top tier gives you is classic games and game trials. So I was honestly quite surprised to hear that. PS Plus has been doing constant numbers for Sony, and it's often called out in their year-end reports for its excellent financial performance and steady growth. So with these sorts of results, while also protecting their day one box sales, it's unsurprising that Sony are pretty happy with where things have landed. Finally, I do want to shout out one very important thing that I've mentioned a couple of times on the channel before, but it remains just as important today, even more so in fact, the Stop Killing Games initiative. This is the one being led by YouTuber Accursed Farms, and it's all about getting the EU to consider legislation that would force game makers to make adequate provision for games to exist after official support for them has ended. It all started when Ubisoft announced it was shutting down The Crew, rendering the game completely unplayable because it was an online-only server-based game. It's a reality that affects many modern titles, and setting aside the consumer rights issues of this, it's also a big problem for game preservation, since these things that human beings worked on for years at a time just suddenly vanish, unable to be enjoyed by anyone because the publisher yanks support. The initiative encourages the EU Parliament to consider practical legislation that would address the issue without imposing onerous restrictions on game makers and without forcing them to have to give up their ownership of IP. With everything going on in the world, it's obviously not a life or death issue, but if video games are important to you, and I expect they probably are if you watch this channel, then it's definitely worth signing this petition. It is only open to citizens of the EU. So if you are one of the 30% of people watching this video who live in the EU, then please do click the link in the description below and help get this thing to 1 million signatures before the deadline at the end of July. The clock is ticking, and this is a rare moment where we can encourage legislators to pay attention to an issue that has already claimed many games and will no doubt claim many more should it continue to go unaddressed. Again, that link to the petition is below the like button. A quick lightning round to finish off, and Sony is getting sued for a supposed Sony tax on digital purchases made in Denmark. A Danish not-for-profit consumer rights group is claiming that Sony hold a monopoly on digital game sales for PlayStation, which is true, and that they're abusing that monopoly by overcharging consumers to the tune of 47%. It's similar to an ongoing case in the United Kingdom where Sony is being sued for £5 billion in damages. Is it right that only platform holders can sell digital games? I don't know, Tim Sweeney of Epic certainly didn't think so, and he won big in the end in his battle against Apple, so I'm sure Sony's lawyers are sweating just a little. Capcom has finally patched Monster Hunter Wilds on PC after the title sank to an overwhelmingly negative 12% rating on Steam. Damn man, those are the sorts of numbers Capcom typically only sees for its Resident Evil multiplayer games. Bad reviews were largely down to horrific PC performance, which has since been addressed, but also general dissatisfaction with Monster Hunter Wilds, a game that streamlined the Monster Hunter formula way too much. It's one of the reasons I didn't love it and didn't end up sticking with it after I'd cleared the final monsters. Capcom have just released a title update that included 2 new monsters, but it does seem like the work to get this game back to what fans were hoping for might not be delivered until the game's first major expansion, which will likely arrive mid-next year if the average Monster Hunter expansion timing holds consistent here. Hello Studios has avoided closure, and they're starting the hype cycle for what comes next. Even before Microsoft had announced this recent round of studio closures and job cuts, Hello Studios announced that they'd begin showing what they're working on at this year's Halo World Championships, slated for October in Seattle. Do recall that Halo Studios recently made the jump to Unreal Engine 5, showing off some concept art style tech demos in the process. Given the timing of that initial reveal, we shouldn't be expecting to see too much in October, but hey, anything's better than nothing. At least I hope it is. And finally, in a throwback to an era that Arrowhead would surely prefer to forget, they just released that Helldivers 2 cape that commemorates the mass review bombing campaign that bullied Sony into removing the PSN login requirement. The cape is designed to look like the graph showing the daily number of down votes the game accrued on Steam at the time. With how bruising that chapter was for all involved, it's nice to know that Arrowhead has a sense of humor about it. So what got announced or delayed this week? Well, there were quite a few mini showcases this past week, which offered up a few tidbits. One was the Little Nightmares showcase put on by Bandai Namco. And you might be thinking, man, is Little Nightmares really such a big deal? Apparently so. The series has reportedly sold through 20 million games, so there's certainly a big audience out there for it, which explains why Namco have sought to keep the original series alive even after the original developer Tarsier stepped away. They announced 2 things at this showcase: the release date for Little Nightmares 3, which is coming out to all platforms on October 10th. Horror game studio Supermassive are taking care of this one, and they also announced that they're packing in a remastered version of Little Nightmares 1 with it too, but only if you pre-order it. Man, that's quite a crafty gotcha, tacking the original classic onto the new entry with a new developer. I actually played a little co-op demo of this one during the early previews that were held last year, and I was not immediately convinced. Still, a lot can change in a year, so I'm holding out hope. The other Little Nightmares announcement was the reveal of a new game, Little Nightmares VR Altered Echoes. No other information was given, not even the developer or the platforms, but always a little surprise when companies continue to announce VR titles, given the broad support for VR seems to be waning. I mean, less so for MetaQuest and Steam VR, but certainly for PlayStation VR. But PlayStation clearly does not want us to be alarmed by Beat Saber pulling support for PSVR 2, because last week they highlighted count them, 4 games coming to PSVR 2 in the near future. The first one was Grit and Valor, an existing World War II roguelike mech tactics game that came out earlier this year, which is now getting an optional VR mode that was out on August 21st. There's also some new PSVR 2 gameplay for Dreams of Another, the next game from Japanese studio Q Games, best known for the Pixel Junk series. We already knew this one was coming sometime in 2025, and it'll also be playable in flat screen mode. The next one was a new one, a combat racing game where you play as a meteor racing other meteors through space. It's called Meteora, and it's slated for sometime in 2026, and it will also be playable on a flat screen. Definitely seeing a trend here. The last announcement though is actually kind of cool, and it's VR only. It's called Hotel Infinity, and it's an adventure puzzle game set inside an impossible reality-defying hotel, and it's designed as a room scale experience so it can mess with expectations and your sense of space. This one comes from the studio that made Manifold Garden, which is a really stunning mind-bending first-person puzzle game with similarly impossible environments and heavy MC Escher vibes. Check that one out, and probably keep an eye on this one too if you need a reason to hang on to your PSVR 2 sometime in 2025 for this one. Speaking of messing with your expectations, that's exactly what Arc Systems Works did with their little showcase this week. Obviously, this Japanese developer and publisher are best known for their fighting games like Guilty Gear and Dragon Ball FighterZ, and they're also the outfit behind the very cool looking Marvel Tokon Fighting Souls, which just got announced at a PlayStation showcase last month. But man, the more notable reveals in this showcase were absolutely not fighting games. First up, any of you remember Bubble Bobble? Great retro game, catch enemies in bubbles and then pop them, great music. Anyway, Taito is bringing it back with a new title, the first one in like 5 years, and Arc Systems Works is publishing it. It's called Bubble Bobble Sugar Dungeons, and it's coming sometime in 2026 for PC, PS5, and Switch. Next up, Arc announced that they'd be publishing something called Demon's Night Fever in 2026. This was only a teaser trailer, but it's being described as a, quote, raising speedrun simulation RPG where you embrace being evil, end quote, which does not help me understand what this is in the slightest. The reason why this one is notable is because the developer is a new studio called Super Niche, founded by the former president of Nippon Ichi Software. They were famous for the long-running Disgaea series of tactical RPGs, among other things. No platforms announced for this one just yet. The next game is being developed by Arc, and it's probably the one that received the most attention out of the showcase, but again, absolutely not a fighting game. It's called Dear Me, I Was, and it's a wordless visual novel style adventure game featuring some really nice looking watercolor art and rotoscoping, meaning they film the scenes and then animate over the top of them. The art director behind this one is a guy named Tasuke Kanasaki, who is notable for being the artist for a bunch of cult DS adventure games like Another Code and Hotel Dusk, a detective game that made you hold the DS like a book. The director for this one is a woman by the name of Maho Taguchi, who also worked on Another Code, and she says this game is, quote, designed for adult women, aiming to help you feel a bit more positive after playing, end quote. This one really came out of left field, but also, man, it feels like the Nintendo DS era of gaming is making a comeback. This one's a Switch 2 exclusive because I guess there's history there, and it's due out in mid-2025, so not long to wait now. Finally, Arc's One Last Thing moment ended up being a small-scale isometric action RPG called Damon and Baby. However, it was directly followed up by the company's creative officer, Daisuke Ishiwatari, coming out afterwards to explain that even though Arc is known as a fighting game company, they want to branch out and work on other genres and mid-scale projects because the industry today is so high risk. He said the company also wants to find ways to train up its young creators and let them actually exercise some creative control, with some hope that some of them might make the next big thing, explaining that their flagship series, Guilty Gear, also started as a very small project. So at the end of the day, this showcase certainly wasn't what Arc Systems' most hardcore fans were expecting, but honestly, kind of cool for a mid-sized developer like Arc with around 250 employees to just go out there and tell everyone, you know what? It's actually not great for us to just work on big games. Here's a bunch of smaller stuff for different niche audiences that we think you might like. A very, very pertinent message that we hope certain people based in Redmond, Washington might be listening to at this moment, but we'll talk about that later. Somewhat along the same lines, when was the last time you played a game from Turkey? Last week, a studio called Fallen announced a game called Parakoda, a narrative mystery adventure game set in Istanbul. It's certainly tapping into that Disco Elysium vibe. The protagonist is a man stuck in purgatory and forced to confront all of his bad choices in life with a focus on branching dialogue and environmental puzzles. It's set for release on PC, no release date just yet. Quick one from Surgeon Studios, developers of Tales of Kenzara Zao. Their new game is a psychological horror game based on the Hollywood industry called Dead Take, and it's being published by Power World developer Pocket Pair. They just announced the 2 leads for this one, and you're sure to know them: Ben Starr, aka Clive/Verso, and Neil Newborn, aka Astarion. The game itself is apparently a bit of a reverse escape room where you'll have to find live action clips and splice them together to find solutions, kind of a bit like Her Story with exploration bits. This one's due out sometime this year. Skimming through a bunch of release date announcements now, there's a couple of notable games coming out of early access in July, and one of them is Supervive, the NetEase published battle royale meets MOBA hero shooter that seemed to be doing pretty well for itself when it launched late last year. That hits 1.0 on July 24th. Abiotic Factor is the popular co-op survival game that's been doing really well for itself during its early access. That one launches into 1.0 on July 22nd, where it'll also launch onto consoles and Xbox Game Pass and PS Plus game catalog, so it's really going wide with that one. Hellblade 2 locked down its launch date for PS5. That's landing on August 12th, with the patch landing for PC and Xbox, so they can enjoy the new developer commentary and performance mode. The reboot of Painkiller from 3D Realms and Polish developer Ansar set a release date of October 9th this year. And finally, Nintendo announced the release date for its wheelchair basketball game Drag X Drive on the Nintendo Today app, because that's just what they do now, I guess. This is the one where you use the mouse mode on both Joy-Cons to simulate pushing a wheelchair, and then use motion controls to shoot. It's coming out on August 14th. Just one cancellation to speak of this week, and it's the end of service for Resident Evil Reverse, the multiplayer component for Resident Evil Village. This is the 6-player competitive multiplayer shooter that was supposed to be part of the game at launch, but it was delayed for like a year and a half, and when it finally released, it was really terrible and no one played it. They announced a while back that they were going to shut it down, and over the weekend they did just that. Capcom had high hopes for this one and had previously said that they planned to continue investing in it, but I guess they reversed that decision. All right, so what came out last week? Well, the biggest one, of course, was Hideo Kojima's Death Stranding 2 on the beach, when Norman Reedus goes to Australia and he's all like, hey, I'm walking here. He doesn't actually do that, by the way, but it would be cool if he did. I'm still playing through it. I'm nearing the final chapters now, and I definitely have some thoughts, not gonna lie, but they are best saved for a full review, so do look forward to that sometime next week. What about everyone else? Well, it's sitting at a very comfortable mighty 90 on OpenCritic, where it's clear that everyone who put their hand up to review this one liked the first one. I'll go out on a limb and say that if the first game really didn't click with you, then don't expect this one to either. By far and away, the most critical review was from GameSpot. They gave it a 7 out of 10 and found that it echoed the first game a little too much and removed a little too much friction. Quote, hitting the end credits came with the painful realization that Death Stranding 2 can't rekindle the novelty of its world and characters as effectively the second time around. Ironically, it feels like a more ordinary experience, which makes sense as a sequel that isn't looking to be as disruptive with new ideas as it was the last time. While some may enjoy the more action-oriented approach, I found the focus on weapons and easier access to tools clash with the meditative experience of doing deliveries on foot and trying to avoid danger that was present in its predecessor, especially with more missions that purposefully pit you against enemies with all sorts of high-end weapons, end quote. Meanwhile, here's Eurogamer, who gave it a 4 out of 5, saying, quote, this game unequivocally embraces its sequel status. It's bigger, brighter, and more accessible. It also sees Kojima, now in his 60s, stepping into a new role. He's not just a modern video games' postmodern prophet and arch stylist, he's become its preeminent sentimentalist. For those who rolled their eyes at much of the first game, Death Stranding 2 will likely inspire a similar reaction, but there's no doubt that Kojima remains wide-eyed. This big, absurd game is in many ways the ultimate synthesis of the writer-director's idiosyncrasies and obsessions, while containing, amid the noise, perhaps his clearest message yet. The world may be a mess, but its problems cannot be solved alone by communicating over the internet. Go, step outside, don't just touch grass, embrace another person, end quote. Moving right along now to another sequel that released last week, albeit a remaster of it. System Shock 2 25th Anniversary Remaster is the re-release of the immersive sim classic. Console versions were delayed with the new release date set for July 10th, but the PC version still came out and it's sitting at a mighty 86 on OpenCritic. No surprises there, it's still a classic. PC Gamer scored this one 85 out of 100, saying, quote, this is the way you should play System Shock 2 now. You could approximate the remaster with a constellation of mods and quality of life fixes, but Night Dive's System Shock 2 removed removes the headache, offering a well-curated suite of changes and upgrades, with some of that dedicated mod community even represented on the dev team. I also have to say that screenshots and even side-by-side comparisons with the original don't quite cut it. This game looks fantastic in motion, end quote. Moving on from games that are old but new looking to new games that are old looking. Ruffy and the Riverside is that 3D platformer where you can copy and paste textures to solve puzzles and get around the world. This one has a strong 79 on OpenCritic, with many reviews having good things to say about how fresh it feels. Nintendo Life gave this one an 8 out of 10, saying, quote, Ruffy and the Riverside is an enjoyable return to the colorful 3D platforming romps of the late 1990s, and it's one that brings its own clever idea to the table, rather than just simply copying and pasting everyone else's homework, with nods to Mario, Zelda, Crash Bandicoot, and more, levels jam-packed with fun puzzles, and the easy breezy nature of Ruffy's copy-pasting abilities at the heart of it all. This is one of the better odes to this sort of caper that I've played, and performance issues aside, a very impressive debut to boot, end quote. All right, so what's coming out this week? So like, I don't know if it's the US public holiday or fear of Death Stranding or whatever, but there are virtually no new games coming out this week, like at all. Even the level of questionable hentai games on Steam has been dramatically reduced over the next 7 days, and that never happens. The only game kind of worth mentioning, and it's a big kinda, is Harvest Moon: The Lost Valley Skytree Village for Switch, which comes out on July 3rd. And like, these are remasters of 2 Harvest Moon games that came out on the Nintendo 3DS and were critically panned. I reckon you'd be hard pressed to find even Harvest Moon diehards that would be really excited for these. The period we cover next episode is when things start to pick up again though. At the end of next week, we've got Tony Hawk 3 and 4, Patapon Replay, Eric's Home, a new Destiny expansion launches. Wait, what? A Destiny expansion launches? I ought to take a look at that. We've also got Donkey Kong Bonanza the week after that. Be sure to check out preview on the channel if you haven't already. The RoboCop DLC and that wacky Pac-Man Metroidvania thing. So stuff to look forward to next week. But right now, yeah, there ain't much. Good chance to catch up on that backlog, I guess. Oh, and there's also this. So put this on your radar. This is Fretless, The Wrath of Rifson, and now that the world is obsessed with active turn-based RPG combat systems from small teams, we figured we might as well shine a spotlight on some neat-looking ones on the horizon. Fretless is a retro music-themed RPG set in a musical world, aka a guitar PG, if you will. And I wish I could take credit from that, but I can't. It was the devs who said it first. Its combat system revolves around collecting different riffs for your instruments, which you can then chain together as attacks in battle using rhythm-based QTEs set to the beat of the soundtrack. So part active turn-based battler, part rhythm action game. You can also mix and match your kit to suit your favorite playstyle, each linked to a specific musical genre, and overall it just seems like a really nice idea. The dev recently announced a release date of July 18th, and there's a free demo out on Steam right now, so you can give it a shot. If you like the look of Fretless, you can find a link to it over on our Steam Curator page, which also has links to all of the other Put This On Your Radar stuff we've recently covered. I'll leave a link to all of that below the like button. Sort of free stuff time now, and on the Epic Store, you've still got time to grab the excellent Sable this week, and if you haven't already done that, why not? It's really good. Make sure you grab it. But after that, the next game on offer is Figment, a charming looking adventure game that's also set in a world inspired by music. Some good Steam reviews for that one, so worth a look if it catches your eye. Xbox also announced their Game Pass games for July. The biggest one here is Tony Hawk 3 and 4, which is kind of a given, seeing that they own Activision. Little Nightmares 2 is also in there, in case all those announcements from earlier got you in the mood. And there's also High on Life and The Ascent heading back onto the service once more. All in all, a quieter wave this time around, which checks out for this time of year. Over on the PS Plus, they announced their essential games for July, and they're all pretty decent. There's Diablo 4 for the RPG crowd, The King of Fighters 15 for the fighting game crowd, and Don't Nod's underrated climbing game Jusant as well. Be sure to take a look at that one, it is great. And finally, Nintendo is throwing up the next GameCube game for Nintendo Switch Online subscribers with a Switch 2. It's Super Mario Strikers, because Nintendo saw how well Rematch was doing and was like, do we have a fun soccer game? Yeah, we have a fun soccer game, so there it is, enjoy. Right now, everyone seems to be playing Death Stranding 2, God bless, so it's only right that our feel-good story for the week celebrates the man at the center of it all, even though he's definitely not shy about celebrating himself. In an interview with GameSpark, translated by Automaton, Kojima revealed that it's him, not his staff, that includes all of these self-referential Kojima-san Easter eggs and memes. In fact, he revealed that sometimes he would ask his staff to add some bullshit to the game, and the staff would just go, huh? And then pretend to not hear him. He is particularly proud of one little Easter egg that's a little bit of a spin on the hot springs you find in Ghost of Tsushima. See if you can spot the subtle Kojima Easter egg hidden in this one.
Truly soothing.
All right, ladies and gents, that is the show. Do expect that Xbox video to go up tomorrow after I've had some time to really look at all the stuff and formulate some proper thoughts. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this show, we'd love it if you could drop it a like. That keeps us warm on those cold, lonely nights. Same goes for that subscribe button. If you haven't already hit it, then it's right there, along with the notification bell, so you'll never miss an upload. We're also on Spotify, so be sure to check us out there too, if that's where you get your video content, because yes, Spotify does support video playback these days. Thanks again for watching, and a big thanks to this video's sponsors, Nvidia and Gigabyte. Doom the Dark Ages is a sort of game that really showcases what modern graphical technology is capable of. Believe it or not, id Software pushed things even further last week when they rolled out support for path tracing and Nvidia DLSS 4. It's technology that's at the absolute cutting edge of fidelity and performance, and it's made possible thanks to this video's sponsors, Nvidia and Gigabyte. But what is path tracing? Well, it's basically the most realistic modeling of light that we've ever seen in video games. It's not just reflections or volumetrics or global illumination or whatever else, it's everything all at once, and it absolutely transforms scenes by giving them lighting that is deep and textured and realistic looking. This lighting is further assisted by Nvidia's ray reconstruction technology, which uses AI to provide improved lighting accuracy and a more detailed image. Of course, this technology is pretty demanding on your GPU, but that's where Nvidia's DLSS 4 and multi-frame generation come in. Multi-frame gen can add up to 3 additional frames per rendered frame, and that means in games like Doom the Dark Ages, when you've got path tracing enabled, you can still push upwards of 200 frames per second or more, resulting in the smoothest possible frame rate experience while fully utilizing the capabilities of high refresh rate TVs and monitors. If this sort of cutting edge tech is what you're after, then I do recommend checking out Gigabyte's award-winning range of 50 series GPUs. Their Hawk fan design is specifically engineered to maximize both air pressure and the amount of air circulating through your GPU, and its composite liquid metal componentry keeps temperatures down while keeping frame rates up. It's got server-grade thermal conductive gel for improved VRAM temperatures, as well as a large vapor chamber, superconductive heat piping, and an angular thermal fin design. Plus, there's nice little flourishes like customizable RGB and even an edge view LCD display, things like GPU stats or text or images or GIFs if you like. We're at the start of a new GPU generation, so there's no better time to upgrade so you can enjoy games like Doom the Dark Ages with every single setting maxed out, including path tracing enabled. You can check out Gigabyte's Aero, Master Ice, and Eagle Ice models by clicking the link in the description below. Thanks Nvidia and Gigabyte for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching it.